Tonight's Cascade Mycological Society invited speaker is Heather Dawson. Heather's a PhD student at the University of Oregon studying truffles and oak savannas and spent at least the last 5 years following her truffle dogs around the woods, learning firsthand about the vast number of truffle species that are easily detected by a canine nose. In this case, this canine's nose. The current truffle dog Rye has an exceptional talent for generalizing truffle aroma and has found countless truffles from around 50 fungal genera. It's wild. Rye's ability is demonstrating an exciting method to expand current knowledge of truffle diversity and ecology. Heather's oak savanna research is supported by the Freeman Rose Scholarship, which she received in 2024 from CMS. Everybody give Heather Dawson a warm welcome.
All right, I'm here to talk to you tonight about truffle diversity of the Willamette Valley oak savanna. And I've got here with me Rye, my truffle dog. So this is a partnership. And to start out, I want to talk a little bit about what oak savanna is. So you've probably seen these beautiful oak habitats around the Willamette Valley, but they're kind of hard to find these days. Very fragmented and degraded landscape, but they're still out there and people care about them and are trying to learn more about how we can support them. And when you look at the savanna, you see the trees, you see the plants, there's a tiny little rye there. What you don't see are the truffles. And so there are lots of truffles out there, lots of different species of truffles, and we don't actually know that much about them. We know they're in association with these trees, and they're providing trees with important nutrients. But you know, all these different species are doing various different things, and compared to conifer habitat, where we've done a lot of truffle study, we don't know that much about all the different species in the Willamette Valley oak habitat. Even not scary. They're a lot taller than that. So, what is an oak savanna? Oak savanna is characterized by this open understory dotted with oak trees scattered around. And here in the Willamette Valley, we primarily have Quercus dariana, Oregon white oak, but we're also at the northern end of the range for Quercus columbiana, which is the California black oak. So you do see that on occasionally. And Oregon white oak is a pretty neat tree because it's uniquely adapted to handle both prolonged drought, which we have in summers, and also seasonal flooding, which we have in the winter period. So it's a highly adaptable tree and does, of course, really well on our planet. And it's not a discrete boundary for the oak savanna areas. You have this gradient typically of prairie merging into oak savanna habitat where the trees are widely spaced, and then getting into denser oak woodland, often bounded by this conifer habitat higher up in the hills. And so oak savanna only stays open because there are certain features of the landscape that keep it open. Historically, that's been fire. These days, commonly grazing keeps it open, and sometimes it's simply the geology of the landscape. So rocky, extra moist, but in general, we've lost a lot of oak savanna to encroaching Douglas fir primarily, but also it's simply been removed because it's an incredibly fertile area for development and agriculture. So why do we care about oak savanna? In general, the savanna habitat is at risk worldwide, especially in the Willamette Valley. You can see in this map what was the historic distribution of grassland, oak woodland, and riparian areas being surveyed in around 1850. And then on the right is closer to what we have today. So we're really just a fraction of this community, and it's really special. There's a really high biodiversity of plants, animals, and also fungi, although we know a lot less about the fungi. And interestingly, this is an ecosystem that's potentially quite resilient to climate change because, as I mentioned, these oak trees are adapted to drought, heat, and fire as well, as fire becomes more common. And you know, the conifer systems are at risk for drought and fire. Oak is potentially going to handle these changes a little bit better. So we should be thinking a lot about how we can preserve and manage these habitats. And so historically, the Willamette Valley was managed and shaped by the indigenous Calabria. So when the Euro-American explorers first came to the Willamette Valley, they found this really interesting park-like open areas where this is John Wilkie's described it as destitute of trees except scattered oaks. These look more like orchards and fruit trees planted by the hand of man than groves of natural growth. And he was onto something because these habitats were managed by people. You know, they weren't growing there just without, human influence. And they also noticed how commonly these areas were burned. Noting the country had been overrun by fire, which had destroyed all the vegetation except the oak trees, which appeared to be uninjured. So oak trees are actually quite tolerant of fire, and a lot of the understory vegetation is as well, because they've adapted to this frequent fire regime, which today, of course, has essentially been completely lost. And as I mentioned, fungi are incredibly understudied in these habitats, and we know essentially nothing about how they respond. So why study savanna fungi? Here, of course, but fungi play really important roles in nutrient cycling, such as decomposers, like these little bombs on an oak leaf, and also mycorrhizal fungi, like most truffles are, in connection with the oak trees, providing them with important nutrients. And compared to the conifer studies done in surrounding areas in the Pacific Northwest, we've done very little studies on Willamette Valley oak-associated fungi. And of course, we know pretty much nothing about how they respond to the different land management methods being introduced in these habitats. And so truffles play a really interesting role in oak savanna. Of course, truffles play an important role in all these different habitats, but especially in oak savanna, where the seedlings are trying to establish at areas distant from the mature parent trees. The truffles are there, and they're going to be eaten by these small mammals, those little critters that run around, and those critters are the ones that are able to disperse the truffle inoculum far enough away from the parent tree and potentially provide that inoculum to a seedling that's trying to establish out in the open where there is no mycorrhizal inoculum. So basic step here is the Oregon white oak starts out forming mycorrhizal associations with fungal symbionts. These mycorrhizal fungi produce rooting bodies. Some of these are hypogeous, so underground truffles, which are then eaten by rodents, which disperse truffle spore inoculum via their fecal pellets, their poop. And then the truffle spore inoculum forms mycorrhizal with the seedling roots, and that will support the establishment of seedlings in these open savanna habitats. And I kind of noticed this when I've been out with Ryan, looking in the habitats. It's pretty rare to see an established sapling, honestly. It's quite unusual. Usually you often see like green sprouting oaks that have been cut back, but it's rare to see an established sapling. And pretty much every time I see one, Ryan's out there and he's finding truffles right around. Even the little baby trees, they've got truffles. I don't really see other mushrooms around them. It's actually pretty rare to see mycorrhizal fungi growing above ground in these habitats. But I see lots of truffles, so that's anecdotal, but interesting. And before we get too far, everyone has an idea of what a truffle is, but I want to get a little more technical. A truffle is essentially an underground mushroom. So it used to be something above ground, and then over time, climate, other factors made it more advantageous for this particular individual to fruit above ground. So a little bit about truffle anatomy. The truffle's inside is called the gleba, and this is where the spores are contained, typically between veins or folds. And then the outside of the truffle, it's got a protected outer skin, and that is called the peridium. And then truffle spores themselves are often a lot bigger and more ornamented than most mushroom spores, which gives them protection for passing through animal digestive tracts. And so my connection with oak savanna truffles started a few years ago. So I was working with Biddy Roy at the University of Oregon on a fungal distribution project where they're looking at the different fungi in conifer habitat, prairie habitat, and oak habitat. And I was lucky enough to be able to go out with Rye and explore the truffles there. And I had pretty much entirely been out in conifer habitat before this. I didn't even think about oak truffles. It didn't occur to me that oaks would have truffles. And so I brought Rye in this habitat and I started to see all this cool stuff that I had never seen before in conifer habitat. So it was very exciting for me. And the other part of this is that we were looking at burned and unburned habitat to see if there's any difference in the fungal composition there. And I noticed huge differences in the conifer habitat, but essentially no differences in the oak, which was interesting to me because it indicated that potentially these fungi are adapted to fire. And this is a super tiny poster. You don't have to look at it too much, but this was this is a poster I made summarizing some of the results I acquired from these surveys, finding very clearly that the oak woodland truffles had patterns of seasonality, but didn't have any patterns of fire. Whereas the conifer forest truffles showed really strong patterns of fire, where I was seeing completely different things in the burn forest compared to the unburned forest. And so this is how I got into fire and truffles in oak savanna. Of course, prescribed fire today is a hot topic. There's some downsides, there's some upsides, and it's really complicated. And a lot of the land management organizations are working with the indigenous to try to bring fire back to this landscape. And this is important because we can use fire to maintain that open understory of oak savanna. It will reduce the conifer competition. So as I mentioned, the conifers will come in and shade out the oak trees. Fire will, knock back those seedlings because of less tolerant for fire. And if we do this on a semi-regular basis, it'll set the stage for regular low-intensity fire, as opposed to high-intensity fire, which could potentially catch the oaks. And so there are some challenges. This is a picture of an area in the Mount Pisgah park area where there was a wildfire actually that came through, but this wasn't prescribed. It came through and burned a bunch of oak trees. And it was actually quite hot because fire had been excluded from that area for quite some time. And as you can see, the oak tree there, without any leaves, I guess it's pretty small, those instead. And that's because the fire was hotter than it would naturally have been in regular frequent fire regime. So the exclusion fire in these habitats has led to fuels buildup underneath, and a lot of woody shrubs have been encroaching. In particular, there's a lot of non-native species, such as Himalayan blackberry and fast-growing species like Scotsboro. And so when fire moves to an area that has these species, it'll run a lot hotter and potentially kill the oak trees. And on top of that, there's all these complex dynamics of some invasive species doing really well. Following fire, there's a lot of efforts that can be included, such as immediately planting native seeds. But in general, fire is not a perfect fix. There's a lot we have to do because the scenery has completely changed since the time that was regular feature of landscaping. So a little bit about fungi and fire. We actually know a lot about how fungi respond to fire in conifer ecosystems because there are these fire-tolerant fungi that pretty much only show up after a forest fire in conifers. One of these that people are often familiar with are morels because they're tasty, people love them. But if you go out after a forest fire, typically in the first year, you can sometimes find these, incredible swaths of morel fruiting, and you're not going to see those in other forests. And there's some other ones as well that people are interested in eating, but you commonly see like astraeus. There's a funky earth star that shows up. We saw that on the burn. Rhizina undulata is an ascomycete, which you pretty much will never see without the burn. Geopixus is little orange cups, pretty common to see along with vanilla. I saw a whole bunch of this rhizopodon or rhizopodon mockery in the fire. I also see that in unburned areas, so it's not exclusively fire. But the general message is that fire in conifer habitats pretty predictably changes the fungal communities there. Overall, it seems to generally reduce the antimycorrhizal diversity, so those fungi that are in association with trees, but lead to an increase in these specific pyropolis or fire. But we don't really necessarily see any of that with oaks, but we also don't really know about oaks. So my study questions include whether prescribed fire affects oak-associated truffles, and whether or not certain taxonomic groups in those truffles show greater resilience or sensitivity to fire. So my study design includes surveying 4 sites with paired burned and unburned study plots. So I looked for areas that had been treated with a burn, with prescribed burning, but then also a section that had been left without fire. It's a very, very hard thing to find around here because when people are introducing fire, they're usually burning all the savanna and not leaving some of it intact. But I did find 4 areas, and so ever since December 2023, which is when I began my monthly truffle surveys, I've been going out with Rye, and I have Rye survey my truffle plot for about an hour, and I record every single truffle he finds, and then I collect everything that's unique. And then also, I've been collecting soils, because in the soil, I can do DNA sequencing and figure out what's there, but may or may not be actually producing spore parts, because there may be some stuff that's kind of just lying in wait, maybe it's been affected by the fire. So try to get the whole picture of what's fruiting and also what's just existing there, potentially on the tree roots. And so I'm going to do 3 rounds of soil collection. I'm still in the middle, you see, we're towards the blue bar there, is kind of where I am in the progress of this project. So I haven't finished yet. I'm still in the data collection and field part, but I have some results to show you. So we'll see lots of pictures tonight, but not so many greater conclusions. And just know, I don't actually go out in summer. There are no truffles in the summer. The ground is essentially a rock. It's very, very dry. Oak savanna gets really dry in the summer. I have attempted it. Brian can't dig and there's no truffles. So it's not worth it. So a little bit about my study sites. These are the 4 that I have. Out west, I have a site in Fern Ridge, Cobra Ridge to the north, and then 2 sites around the Harbor recreation area, where they're in the middle. And so these have different burn years. Hard Buford area, both sites were burned most recently in 2023 with prescribed fire. Cobra Ridge burned in 2022, and the latest burn at the Fern Ridge site was in 2018. So that's a little bit of the burn.
What are those other 3 sites on the bottom middle stack?
So was that?
What is the name of the 3 sites?
Oh.
On the bottom?
Howard Buford is the southernmost site, and then Willamette Valley is kind of on the edge of Howard Buford Park.
Bottom one is. Howard Buford.
Howard Buford, yeah.
What's the one missing?
That's just us. That's usually.
Okay.
I just kind of orient the location of the site, so all the sites are around the
Yeah.
And so this is what a couple of my paired burned and unburned plots of that Howard Buford recreation area sites look like. So the unburned site has, it's still savanna habitat, but there's a lot more undergrowth there. So some woody stuff like honeysuckle coming up around the trees, fairly dense grass, and then the burned area is a little bit more open. Partly due to the fire and partly also due to the fact that the land manager is going to be clearing the area in preparation for fire. So it's kind of full. And then this is a super interesting site. This is out by Fern Ridge, and it's totally different than all of my other sites because it's white oak and also a lot of that work in California black oak that I mentioned. There's quite a bit out there. And the unburned site, I call it an oak jungle. I think technically you should call it an oak woodland, but it feels like a jungle. I've never seen anything like it. It's super interesting. And the savanna habitat is also, a little bit denser than my other savanna habitats, but it's been maintained through fire and other management. So it's a little bit more savanna focused, but it's very interesting, lots of cool trees out there, but it is pretty different. I think this might be a video. Let's give the internet a chance. Oh, this one comes after. Okay, we're good. Okay, so we already have that right. And this is one of the things that makes my study unique compared to others. People are not using truffle dogs for truffle diversity research. I don't know why, because as I discovered, it's a really great way to do it. Maybe because it's hard to train a dog, that could be part of it. But yeah, the fact that I'm going out and collecting truffles with a dog is pretty unusual. I'm having great success with it. It's been a lot of fun. So Rye, and call him a truffle diversity dog because he's not just a truffle dog, he specializes in truffle diversity. And some of the benefits of using a dog are the precise targeting that they offer. So rather than me guessing where the truffles are, I just follow Rye. He tells me where they are. He's not biased about truffle size or where they might be fruiting. So if you look in, historical records of truffle surveys, they tell you, rake around the drip line of the canopy. That's where you'll find the truffles. The truth is, they're all over the place. It's really hard to predict where they are. And Ryan doesn't have any sense of where truffles should be. He's just out there following his nose. He's not gonna be biased by that. And most of the truffles that we know a lot about are the bigger and easier to see truffles because we're looking with our eyes. Ryan's looking with his nose. And even a truffle the size of a pea that looks like a dirt clod is gonna produce scent for a dog. So it's really, really helpful to have that because I would be missing all these truffles if they didn't happen. And finally, truffles actually take a little bit of mature. So if you're raking around looking for truffles, you're gonna get little immature truffles and maybe hopefully some mature truffles. With Rye, I completely miss all mature ones because they only produce aroma when they're ripe. And so they're basically odorless and undetectable to the dog until those spores are ready, fully mature, and then you can target them. So I'm able to capture a little bit more seasonality in truffles by following the dog. And this is an example of how far away you can find truffles from oak trees. You can't even see the oak tree trunk in this picture. And there's Rye out there digging up a little genius truffle. So just goes to show you can't just rake around the dirt line and find all the truffles. Okay, here we go. So this is a pixelated version of what it looks like. All around oak savanna. A lot of oak savanna that I'm working in is really dense grass. It can be very difficult to figure out where to find truffles. But Ryan follows once he smells something, he starts digging it up. Sometimes I get a taste of this. It's really big, easy for me to see. I have a Lancaster truffle. He's very pleased with himself. Oh, he gets a ball reward for truffles. I don't give him treats. He gets a ball, which sadly is not. I didn't include a video of that this time, but he's very, very happy about his ball. Yeah, there's another one. This one was a little bit harder for him to find, and just shows a little bit of how dependent I am on Rye. Even though spring is a really interesting time to find truffles because there's a lot of diversity, it's also the hardest time for him to work because above 60 degrees, he's panting. Yeah. And so it's hard for him to smell with his nose. So often he'll be digging, he has to take like breathing breaks. So he'll dig and he'll come up for air and then he'll dig. And the soil can be pretty hard time of year, but the truffles are still out there, believe it or not.
How many varieties are you finding in that area?
That's what I mean by variety. Species, I don't know yet. We have so far about 25, 30 species. A lot of my
30 species, you said?
Yeah, around 30 species so far. Still working on it.
And then lots of unknowns, right?
A lot of unknowns.
So there's a lot of scientific.
In there, it's hard to tell. But yeah, sometimes they're really small, they're little dirt clods. And without it would be hopeless. Okay, so here are some pretty pictures of truffles and preliminary results from my surveys in burned and unburned habitat. I'm going to show you this graph now, and then again later after I've introduced you to all of these different genera. So I group these at the genus level because it's really hard to tell apart species in the field. Even once you're looking at them under a microscope, they can be hard to tell apart. But we can tell, general patterns because at the genus level, they are related to each other and doing, similar things in these habitats. So overall, I don't see a huge signature of differences in burned and unburned habitats. Certain groups seem to be a little bit more sensitive potentially to fire, but nothing that jumps out at me as in, oh, these ones really can't have a fire, or this is like specifically a fire associated trouble. Tuber and genia are by far the most commonly found truffles in oceanic habitat. And so I'm going to walk through them in order of their abundance, starting with tuber. This is the beautiful tuber versicolor, which is oak living truffle versicolor. It's a really wonderful one. If there were to be a culinary oak truffle, this is one I would elect. But so far, when I show it to other people, they don't have the same reaction that I do, so I'll just keep it as my culinary oak truffle. You know, such preferences are very, very individual. So far, I have found 5 species of tuber in oaks. Tuber candidum is by far the most common. It's absolutely everywhere, basically all the time. Tuber quercicula, a little less common. Tuber laurii is actually one that I found in both conifers and in oaks, so it can associate with both. Tuber californicum, found commonly in California, also up here in Willamette Valley. And then finally, I do have a new species of tuber. So that one will need a name eventually, but it seems to be found in Willamette Valley specifically, so maybe I'll name it after Willamette Valley. And Genia next. So Genia is a really interesting group. Incredibly diverse, and yet we only have a few species described from Western North America. Just a handful, but I have so far, just from my sites, identified 10 species at least. For my next round of sequencing data, I'm pretty positive I'm gonna get more species. And just from my general truffle surveys with rye, I've identified about 24 different species. So they're, without a dog, they're practically impossible to find. This is them cut it in half. They're little tiny dirt clod looking truffles that you would totally miss, but they produce really strong truffle aroma. So for a dog, they're really easy to find when he targets them directly. So Genia is really interesting, incredibly diverse, and hopefully I'll be able to work on that group with a few more names on them. Because I have a dog, and I'm definitely in a unique position to be finding Genia. Next, if you didn't know, there are truffles in the same genera as the common above ground mushrooms, Ricilla and Lactarius. So those two are related. They're both in the family Ricciaceae, and there are a whole bunch of them that actually produce their fruiting bodies underground. And so,
Are they all edible? Lactarius and any of the other guild mushrooms?
that's a good question. Not all of the above ground Ricilla are edible. Many of them
Right, but I'm
aren't.
talking about the,
The underground ones,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think anyone exactly knows, you know, a lot of these haven't been tested. My general thinking is if they're extracting mammals, they should at least be edible for mammals, but I wouldn't necessarily want to make that leap and eat them myself, you know, so. Yeah, there's some that I'm more afraid of than others. I wouldn't be terribly afraid of these, but I also wouldn't eat them. And also, they don't smell like something you want to eat necessarily. Some of them do smell very nice, but mostly they're just odd. You know, just that describes a lot of truffles. They're just odd. So I have 4 species of Ricilla truffles, which used to be called gymnomyces back when we thought that they were genetically distinct from their above ground relatives. Turns out they're not, and we kind of lost that name, which was really useful to talk about the truffle versus non-group. So people still say gymnomyces quite frequently. And then I also have 1 species of Lactarius, which is wildly common in the oaks, really big too, it'd be like fist size, quite common in the winter. And indeed, that was probably technically called a Zelleromyces, which is the name for the Lactarius truffle, but genetically it's indistinguishable from the genus Lactarius. Next, we'll have Hymenogaster. This is one which one of the Cediomyces truffles that was fruiting pretty commonly in burns, so it's potentially less affected by burns. Not my favorite truffle, honestly. I mean, I guess it doesn't have huge amount of life for it, but we have 6 different species in Willamette Valley oaks. The Parkesii is the only one that I know from conifers as well, although the rest seem to be oak specific. And a couple of them are not known from North America yet. The Minisporus and Perisporus are very closely related to truffles from China. So there's a lot of diversity and Hymenogaster there. And so this is one that you don't want to eat. This is actually related to the Hebeloma genus above ground mushrooms, which many of those are fairly toxic. So one could make the leap potentially that you wouldn't want to eat their truffle relatives, but who knows really? They don't smell very edible, so it's not particularly appealing. Next is Storangium. This genus is commonly found in conifers, but the species I'm finding in oaks are different from the conifer species. I don't have any names on them yet. I found 2 different species that don't match anything known, but a lot of these haven't been sequenced yet. A lot of the known species haven't been sequenced yet, so they could be described. And his strangen's interesting. It's got a greenish gleba, which turns into goo with age. They actually melt underground, which in my mind is kind of a last-ditch effort to spread your spores. If nothing came along and dug you up, you melt into goo, at least you can wash away with the rain. It's kind of one way to think about it. But they can be pretty nasty when you find them when they're overripe, which Rye does all the time. All the time. And then we have the Lancaster, again, commonly found in conifers, but the oak species are completely different. This group is a little better studied, so even though I only have names for one of them, that's the Lancaster naxii. The other 2 have been recognized. So mislabeled the tag on the middle one. That one's the Lancaster urospermus in the middle, which is an oak known Lancaster, and then Lancaster Pacific Northwest 06, which is a provisional name, is a new one as well. So it was good to get a record for that. And then Paragalactinia infossa. So this one used to be called Pisiza infossa. Pisiza is a cup fungus genus. You'll commonly see Pisiza in wood chips. Then people figured out that Pisiza infossa was actually distinct from that cup fungus genus, so it got a new name called Paragalactinia. This one produced a really incredible strong truffle aroma, but it's typically actually fruiting out the surface. So when Rye digs these up, he usually mangles them, which is why this one's in pieces. But he'll dig it up on the surface, break it apart. So it is a truffle in a sense that it's producing aroma and is semi-hypogeous, but it's also often above ground. And this is one, it's the only species I found in this genus. So I have just one picture, but it does seem to have a mild positive fire response. I was finding it quite a bit more frequently in the burned areas. And that was really the only one that so far I've seen a positive response. And then we have Elaphomyces. I had to share this picture because as I was crouched down on the ground, taking a picture of my Elaphomyces truffle, this little jet spider came along and just crawled inside. I was taking pictures as it was going in, so then I had to like crack it open and knock it out. It was like it found the little Elaphomyces home. I felt bad. I was like, I'm collecting this thing. I can bring you home. But Elaphomyces is honestly really cool. It's one of the most common things you can find in conifer forests. The species there are also really complicated. They need new names, they've got European names, but they're completely different from what we see in oaks. In particular, Elaphomyces in oaks is really uncommon. I see them incredibly rarely, and a lot of these are, known to be related to European versions, but stuff that we have no record of in North America. So very specious. So far, I have at least 6 species. The ones on the bottom I haven't sequenced yet, but I can tell based on morphology, they're completely different from the ones on the top. So really cool stuff. One of my favorites is that yellow one in the bottom middle, which is a black truffle, but then the soil around it was just bright yellow, full of this bright yellow mycelium, and it was coating the outside as well. So total mystery on that one. Excited to see what it is, but I think in conifer forest, I'm tired of these. I see them all the time. In oaks, I get so excited every time I see them because they're totally different. They're really unique. And honestly, some of the weirdest smells. So the black ones up there, they smell kind of like old leather boots and like bitter soil and roots, not what you think of as truffle smell, which really makes me think about how Rye is able to do this because he's never smelled these things before, and yet he's identifying them as a truffle. I'm not sure how, because they don't smell like truffle to me, but they must be putting out something that's truffle-like. And then we've got one species of Gaudiaria, maybe the most charismatic truffle. It smells like bananas. It's pretty mild and nice. So, anyways, it has first one. No real thing for it yet.
Does it keep that nice banana smell?
No, not really. That also just gets kind of yeasty and funky with age. Some of them get really powerfully bad. That was just, yeah, it's not something you want to infuse with necessarily or eat. Here's one, I don't often get a truffle that I can't even place to genus. But I can't place this one to genus, and I think that's because the genus potentially doesn't exist. This one is a total oddball. And so, if you look at the spores, they're pretty clear. And then if you put them in Meltzer's, which is a common stain used in mushroom microscopy, they turn bright red. I've never seen such a strong reaction. There's one known truffle genus called Protogaduria that does something like this. It's never been sequenced before. It's found only a handful of times. My theory is that this one's related to that, but I won't necessarily know because I can't match the sequence to it. But I'm pretty excited about whatever oddball this is. It's almost certainly related to Gardageria and Hysterangium in that bigger group, but it's fairly unknown. Definitely weirdo. That one was from Range area, so very cool. Cascade flexiascus. This is a purple truffle. It's quite lovely. To be completely honest, the most purple one there is not from the Willamette Valley. That's from an area in Southern Oregon. I had to include it though because it's so beautiful. And because I did find it in the Willamette Valley, and it's not really known for this area. It's mostly a California truffle. So that was kind of an exciting one.
How does that one smell? Is it sweet?
Yeah, this is quite lovely. It smells sort of, best I can describe is sort of like bready and soy sauce. It's quite captivating. I brought some home from Southern Oregon to share with some other folks. And then I pulled it out of the fridge and I was like, what happened to my beautiful truffle room? It smelled like a yogurt smoothie. It was the weirdest thing. It was like a total flip flop from being this like umami, sweet savory combination. The yogurt smoothie then got cold. So mysterious. I guess maybe not best choice for infusing unless you like yogurt smoothies. And then I mentioned earlier that some truffles are saprotrophs, they're decomposers. And so this is one that I found extremely rarely in oak habitat, but also in prairie habitat where there are no oaks nearby. And we identified it using DNA as sclerogaster, which is in the same family as earth stars. And earth stars are decomposers. So this is an example of wood decomposer fungi that potentially likes prairie and savanna habitat, but isn't depending on the trees for nutrients. And I took a nice picture of it, but then I also felt like I had to include my hand for scale. So you understand just how small these things are. They're really quite small. Not too hard to find if you know what you're looking for because they're light and crawl out of the soil. But Rye finds them because they smell incredibly strong of like sweet lemon bar. They're really lovely. When I bring home the truffle box after a day of collecting, if I have a sclerogaster in there, it outcompetes any other truffle smell. It's incredibly strong. So I don't know what it's attracting, but whatever it is, it's sending out a pretty strong signal.
And I got to give it the common name, which is Lebanese snicket. It has an aluminum after smell. It's odd.
It's kind of like any aluminum lemon bar. It's quite unique. Yeah.
So my understanding is gases that give them their aromas. Have they gotten it down to like some of the more common known ones, which gases they are?
No, because all this truffle research is pretty much exclusively on the culinary truffles. So we know a lot about what the European tubers are producing. What this is producing, who knows? No one's ever looked, So it does seem like dimethyl sulfides are the common things that especially dogs are using to find at least European culinary truffles. I wondered if it's the same kind of thing across all these groups, but I honestly have no idea. It's a pretty exciting area to potentially explore. It's what keeps these things in common? What says I'm a truffle versus I'm just now around mushroom? It's quite very.
Can you ever run them through a gas chromatograph or anything?
That's kind of the plan in the future. I don't have one, but connecting with people that do, so it'd be pretty cool.
So since it smells good, but it's non-edible, can you still infuse and use it?
Yeah, I wouldn't be afraid
There
of
would be no
using
danger in it.
with truffles in
Yeah.
general. It's eating them, potentially you have to have some concerns, but infusion, probably the worst you're gonna have is unpleasant truffle burps.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say that couldn't happen to you, but yeah, it can be dangerous. If you like the smell of something,
Yeah,
just
sure.
put it in a container with, some fatty food, don't let them touch, and see what happens. But oftentimes the results aren't necessarily what you expect, because what you smell from the truffle isn't always what they impart in the food. but you can absolutely experiment. Last one here, I only found this truffle one. And it's also only known from one other location, described from Southern Oregon. As far as I know, I don't think it's been found anywhere else, basically any other time when it was described, so. This is called Pachyploidy austroorgensis, Southern Oregon. So it was a really nice record to find this because it's a fairly unknown trouble. So here we are, back to graph that I showed you, but now hopefully you can put some faces to the name here and see the differences in these and which ones are more abundant, more potentially more less fire tolerant. Yeah, overall, the biggest conclusions are that tuber and genia are the major players in oak savanna truffle environments. The overall diversity is high. Once I've collected everything and looked at the DNA, I'll be able to say exactly how many species. Again, this is just at the genus level. So the diversity is quite a bit higher than just what we see here. So
Were you saying that the Elaphomyces is pretty common? You see it all over. Is that mostly in firs?
yeah, so in conifer habitat, Elaphomyces, I mean, basically, if you go out to an old growth forest, guaranteed there are Elaphomyces there. But in oaks, not so much. They're really hard to find. And just in general, when Bry does find them, it's usually only a couple at a time. So quite unusual in oaks. And so just the other side, I have done, extensive surveys in the Willamette Valley, but I've also been down looking at truffles in the Cascade National Monument down in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And it's been kind of interesting to see how these areas differ. A lot of the same stuff, actually. Biggest difference when I go down to the Cascade National Monument, I have to worry a little bit more about rattlesnakes. Ryan has met a couple rattlesnakes, much to my dismay, he was fine, but something to think about. The biggest difference though, is that in the Cascade National Monument and in Southern Oregon, the oak habitat has a whole bunch of this shrub, this the green stuff at the bottom, which I'll come back to. And so, yeah, just in general, there are a few truffles I've seen only here in Willamette Valley, and a few truffles that I've only really found in Cascade National Monument. Some of the tubers that we have up here seem to be mostly Willamette Valley tubers. The new melanogaster I've only ever found here. A bunch of the Elaphomyces I've only seen here, and then also the sclerogaster. A couple other oddballs, and then Cascade area, like Sarcosphaera, this odd crust fungus truffle called conifer. Another Elaphomyces and a xerocamellis truffle. So xerocamellis is commonly above ground, this one is below ground. But the biggest difference is that there are a whole bunch of Balsamia truffles down there. And I have not seen a single Balsamia truffle in oaks up here. So just a comparison of the abundance, don't take the numbers too seriously because I've spent more time in the habitat up here. But in general, tuber and genia are still the major players in truffle habitat down there. And the other things generally seem to be present, at least when they're in greater numbers. But I see a lot of Balsamia down there, and I haven't seen a single one that was up here. And Balsamia, of course, you have to introduce Balsamia because it's such a gorgeous truffle. This is actually related to elephant saddles. You're familiar with those, the Helmella that come up, it's in the same family as those, you already know it, but here it is. And yeah, so the biggest difference is that when I go down there, I find Balsamia pretty much exclusively with this shrub, buckbrush. So Lycianthus cuneatus is a nitrogen fixing shrub, so it associates with bacteria, fixes nitrogen, and it seems to have a lot of Balsamia under it. But Balsamia is a known ectomycorrhizal fungi, and the shrub does not associated with ectomycorrhizal fungi. So it's kind of a mystery. There's a little distribution there. Primarily the shrub is found in California and Southern Oregon, and you can see Eugene up there, we have just a little tiny patch of it. And one of those patches happens to be at the Harvard Group Recreation Area, very close to my sites. And so I was like, okay, it's time to go see if there's any Balsamia in the buckbrush, because there's oaks on the side there, but then the buckbrush kind of spreads out over the clumps. And yes, there is Balsamia in the I was so pleased. I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I better, but I had no idea. Yeah, I took Ryan out there just last month for the first time.
Yeah.
And he immediately found several Balsania. So the question is it ectomycorrhizal? I think it has to be, because the ones I was looking at, there was no nearby oak. So that's my theory. I collected some roots. I wish I had clear results for you today, but I'm not quite there yet. Again, we just started looking at this. But there's, some promising evidence that it potentially is something pretty interesting, because it would be a new discovery for both of these species. So in conclusion, I found that truffles are indeed abundant in oak savanna, with many new and cryptic species. Most oak savanna truffles appear to be fire tolerant, and there don't really seem to be any specific fire following truffles in oak savanna. Ectomycorrhizal truffle Balsania might not actually associate with Oregon oaks, as we previously assumed it did, but actually with cyanosis. And of course, as another great point, but for the truffle dog side of research, that they really are an excellent way to be just exploring truffle diversity. So following this, I will finish my soil and truffle collections, analyze my sequence and collection data, and then hopefully publish. Thanks you, of course, for Rock, my star.
Two questions. So two questions for you. One, is it a characteristic of the actual fire clearing an area that attributes the characteristics of truffle finding? In other words, if it was manually cleared instead of fire cleared, do you think you'd find the same results?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it probably is, the opening of an area will change how the fungi experience, weather patterns and, potentially competition. So I think, the fact that I'm not seeing a really clear signature of, these fungi are only found after fire in oaks, I think there's a good chance that, for the truffles, fire might not necessarily be that important. It seems very important for a lot of plant species, potentially, and probably, the oaks themselves. As long as, especially keeping the habitat open is the most important part. But yeah, I think for the truffles, easily fire itself is not super important.
Okay. And second question, will Rye get an honorary doctorate?
He really should. He honestly knows more about truffles than I do, because he's out there. He has this scent page knowledge that I don't have.
You have the wisdom though to be with him and realize how much was out there. That
And it is teamwork, we have to talk from each other.
Sometimes I just can't believe it when I get to watch you and the dog will sign, is that what you call it? Alert and everything. And then she'll come rushing over and kind of help with the extraction. And it's sort of encouragement and also you want to get it quickly, is that correct?
Yeah, if you're finding a truffle that's buried in the soil, if I let Rye keep digging, there's a good chance he'll just shatter it as it comes out, especially in dense soil. So sometimes I'll be watching really closely, and the instant I see any sign of truffle, I'll be like, stop. And then I dig it out very carefully with my tools. But yeah, it's definitely a balance.
What I got to see was Rye then has to be patient. And he sits and waits or moves around and waits while you're doing your the work, it's unearthing it, dusting it off, looking at it, someone's cutting it open, he photographs it at that point. And it all takes considerable amount of time, and then he gets his reward, which is so simple and beautiful.
Yeah, he is a very patient dog. I have another dog and he's doing great with truffles, but I don't think I'll ever have another Rye.
Wow.
He's special in all ways.
That's it.
How old is when you start training him?
He was just a puppy, actually. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
It's not a question, but I want to follow up with the
It's a great point. I struggle with the fact that his name is actually a plant, ryegrass. So what do I do with that? I gotta figure out a way around that.
Is that a male or female?
Rye is male.
Okay, and can I ask you what breed is that dog?
He's a golden retriever.
Okay, and how did you come to select that dog, and then how long have you been training him?
So I chose rye not actually for truffles. My hobby is competition obedience, and so I found a dog that was, going to be most promising for that field. But I also had truffles in mind, and any dog that's got a history of, good training behind them is gonna potentially be a good truffle dog. So I started Rye when he was actually very small. I got him in the summer of 2020, and so I trained him a little bit on frozen stuff that I had left over from the previous season in my freezer. And then once fall rolled around and truffle season came, I had him follow around my other dog who was good at culinary truffles. And that's by far and away the best way to train a truffle dog if you have that capacity, because the way that truffles smell in the wild, not having been unearthed, is different than whatever you have in your hand and you bury yourself. So, compared to my other dog, which took me a few years to actually be successful, Rye was basically instant, he picked up immediately. And part of that's him, but part of it is also that he got to go out in the wild and see, Oregon truffles as they were growing. So yeah, he was a good study.
Jim. So I was curious about the spider. Did you get it identified?
Looks like
It's a
just
So
yeah.
does it, I'm curious, have the curiosity of what its relationship is with truffles. Is it specific or
It's just,
No,
do you know?
it's very
I had no idea. It was very purposeful. It was
Okay.
very purposeful. It was like, crawling soil and found it must have seemed like a very safe place. So
Also, are there basidiomycetes that are also found in truffles?
yeah, actually, I should have mentioned which ones were basidiomycetes, but
Oh.
a good half of those that I
Are
mentioned,
basidiomycetes.
like the Russell and Lactarius are both basidios, the Histrangium, melanogaster, immunogaster. I think those are my main basidiomycetes. So yeah, kind of half and half, Ascomycete and basidio. Good.
Sorry, I got distracted by Ryan.
Easy to do.
I know that we're saying that the savannahs are like really at risk. What kind of efforts are being made to preserve it? It's obviously very important, ecology, what's being done and strengthening the common man.
I don't know about what the common man can do, but I do know there's been a lot of effort to reach out to private landowners because most oak habitat is actually owned privately. We have a little bit in public management, but there's a lot in private ownership. And so there's been a lot of encouragement for these landowners to actually, engage with their oak habitat and, potentially bring in fire or just clear out the Douglas fir and stuff like that. So, it's interesting because, so much of it is privately owned, which makes it kind of a trickier thing to preserve because people do, whatever they will with their own land, but bringing awareness to how valuable the habitat is has certainly helped. And getting people interested.
any other questions for Heather?
Talk a little bit about the risks.
The risks of going out and look for truffles and oaks.
Yes.
Okay,
Poison oak?
yeah, I was gonna list that. So people are interested in going out with me and I'm like, you really want to go with me to conifer forest. I love my oak habitat. The poison oak. Obviously, you can't tell Rye to avoid the poison oak. So when he goes out in the habitat, if he buries his nose in a clump of poison oak, I gotta follow him. So pretty much every time I get some poison oak, it's kind of a pain. Biggest problem for me are the ticks. Oak habitat is known for its ticks, and unfortunately, many of those are deer ticks, which carry Lyme disease. Not as bad as the East Coast, but we do have Lyme disease, unfortunately, in the Willamette Valley. So every time I go out, Rye gets most of the ticks. Sometimes he'll come back with, he's just covered, absolutely covered in ticks, and I have to carefully comb him. And he has duct tape. Yeah, you stick them. I carry like a roll of duct tape with me in the field, and then when I find a tick, I just stick it on the duct tape. Yeah, I check myself, and then there's various things. He gets a tick product so that they don't linger in him, but. It's the hazards of oaks. I mean, you do kind of have to fight for this stuff. It's worth it, but the ticks are my least favorite.
And then there's the trip hazards.
Well, it's experience.
Lots of blackberry.
Lots of blackberry and
It's
the-
hard on his feet.
Yeah, I have boots. He doesn't do so well with truffling in boots, but it's an option. It is an option.
Any final questions for Heather? Thank you.